to a boundary modification of the PV 303 magnet site. Economic Development Director Michelle Laurie and Economic Development Project Manager Harry Paxton. Oh, Harry's in the back. Harry, you going to join us, or?
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. Thanks for having us here. We're happy to be with you this evening to update you on the successes of the PV 303 Business Park for the community and for the City of Goodyear, to discuss the role of the Foreign Trade Zone program, and to present you with a desired modification to what is called the FTZ magnet site boundary. And I'll get into those definitions a little bit in a minute here. The first step toward the request is really to get the city input and approval. So this evening we will be discussing the request, and in the near future we will be before you at a regular council meeting to seek actual city approval for the change. So first, some definitions. First, the Foreign Trade Zone program, for those watching and for those in the audience, it was a program created to encourage foreign commerce in the United States. It was created in 1934. Several companies around that time were relocating to other countries at that time to avoid penalties for doing business internationally. So the FTZ was created to reduce costs for companies in this doing a certain amount of export-import activity to foreign countries. In Arizona, there is also an added benefit that reduces Arizona real and personal property taxes by 72%. So the assessment ratio is lowered from 5% to 5% from 18% for new investment in personal and real property. So this is buildings and equipment. And this is only new. As you'll recall, in our city, we have the pilot agreement, payment in lieu of taxes, to where if there's existing property on the tax rolls, that will be kept whole. That piece was added in Arizona, the property tax reduction piece, in the late 1980s as a way to reduce costs for capital-intensive projects, which in Arizona we have a history of having a hard time competing for because of our property tax system. Now, there are two types of FTZ sites, magnet and user-driven. Magnet sites are pre-approved for future zone users, so they have been established by the federal government as zones prior to or regardless of the actual user of the property. Then the user has to qualify later, but they're designated as federally set as a zone. So user-driven zones, or sites, are those designated anywhere in an FTZ area, of which we are part of the GMFTZ, the Western Maricopa Foreign Trade Zone, which seeks federal and local approvals once a potential user or a company is identified, and I'll show you a few of those later this evening. Magnet sites are seen by developers and projects as preferable for their purposes, as there's no question whether they will gain local and federal approvals if the user, once identified, qualifies for the program. So it really acts as a magnet for those companies, because they don't have any question about whether they have to get the local and federal approvals. In July 2009, the city supported the application of PV 303 for the 235 acres at PV 303 as an FTZ magnet site. I think I might have gone, I'm sorry, I went over one. Okay, so let's talk about what has happened at PV 303 since that designation. 900 jobs have been created, with the majority being in manufacturing. This 900 includes companies like Sub-Zero, Dick's Sporting Goods, and REI. Investments made by these companies has been more than $318 million, significantly increasing the property tax base of the city, as well as sales tax revenues generated by company operations, employees, vendors, service providers, and internet sales. And the FTZ has really acted as a competitive advantage for this business park, as well as for Goodyear. So let's look at the original. This is a diagram of the original PV 303 magnet site. Again, that's the pre-designated federal approved zone. So originally there on the west side of the 303, there were 135 acres as designated by those red lined dots there. And on the east, it was 100 acres. So if you see there on the right, the current, you'll see that there's a little bit less on the western side. And you'll see there that building to the bottom there is Sub-Zero. And the building to the north is REI on the west side there. And those are actually user-driven sites. Now they're user-driven users for that. And that was really because they had to buy property for Sub-Zero. They had to buy extra property, and it's a little more nimble to be in a user-driven site. To change a magnet site is a little bit more difficult. It takes about a year. And so they were already a user in the zone and were able to do that pretty easily. And then REI as well there had a quick timeline, and so is a user-driven as well. So that's why it decreased a little bit from the current. And now this is a proposal that's going to come to you, as I said, in a few weeks. And this is the change of that. And of course, there's the red new magnet site lines, the proposal, as well as it shows there the yellow would be the deleted lines from the previous. And then the blue are the current user-driven sites, so you can see that. So this is really, again, to better position the park and the city toward capturing these opportunities. As you'll see there on the east side, it covers some of that spec building A, which is the new building that's going up right now, almost finished, as well as the one that's proposed to go up shortly. And this would be a magnet site net increase of about 228 acres of the whole park, which is more than 1,600 acres of the PV 303 park. So this is designated there for opportunities, or proposed for opportunities that have come our way. So that is really, I'll leave it on this, of the proposal, but that is really just a short presentation. And again, we will have something coming to you in a few weeks on a regular council item, but wanted to give you the opportunity to ask us questions and discuss and see what you'd like to talk about.
Thank you. It may be short, but was full of information on the screen. So who would like to go up first? I'll look on this side. Joanne?
Thank you. Michelle, thank you. Just two questions. One, the 155 acres, I know there's interest in that property, but aren't we still the owners? Would this be an application by the city to have that? I'm not sure how that works.
If you see that, and this would be what we would propose to go forward at that time. See this line? Let me see if I can get it there. Do you see this line right here? That line? That's the city property. So we would be in, and I'm not sure technically how that would work in terms of applying for it, because what happens here now is we would get the city approval if that's what happens in the next month or so, and then we'd go through a process which would last about a year. So ownership on that might change. It's potential. Is that how you would?
Harry, do you have anything?
It would be included with the application. The ownership, would be different than the rest of what you see in the red parcels, but it would be part of the PV 303 magnet site, even though the ownership would be different initially. Gotcha. Hopefully in the future, this will help bring development there and help clear up that area and bring investment to that area.
Right. And the last question, just for the record again, we all know the benefits that FTZ has brought our city. It's been wonderful. But some may still believe that there's a detriment to the schools, and I'm not real sure. I know you said the pilot for existing, sure. But can you go ahead?
Sure, and that is true. I mean, there is a difference in terms of the property tax assessment that's on the properties that are in a foreign trade zone, is a designated foreign trade zone. And, that is kind of the argument about the but-for. Would these things land there if we did not have the FTZ program? Would they be there? And so that's always a question. So, but the difference in the revenue that they would get, it would be assessed at that different, that 5% instead of the 18%. So existing would be at the 18%, which would make more, but it would be more of less because there probably wouldn't be anything built there.
Exactly.
And so it's right now, it's agricultural land, and it's receiving that type of benefit for that. And so it's pretty low. So that's kind of the argument. And that's what we talked to the school districts about. And so the next step, and I should add that the next step after we talk to you is really to go to them and say, this is the discussion that we're having. And we do that every time we go forward with them. And
I appreciate that for the record. I just thought it was
thank you.
important.
And go ahead.
Example,
Please.
if you want me to.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Give you one example. If you look at the 97 acres there, which covers the Dick's Sporting Goods property and also a vacant parcel, it's about 29 acres. In that lower portion there, that gray area is about 29 acres. The real property taxes today, which is it's just vacant property, it's not being farmed today, on that 29 acres is about $68,000 a year. So that's pretty good. Now, if you go down south on that 155 acres, just take 115 of that acres, which is on the tax rolls today, which is being farmed. It's large enough to be farmed. The total taxes today is like $1,600 or about 2.4%, even though that parcel is 4 times the size of the other parcel. So when we bring investment to that site, what you're having to come in is a huge amount of investment that really increases, not at the 18% level, but at the 5% level. And that's not saying anything for the capital investment that's made on equipment on the personal property tax side. For example, Sub-Zero, REI, their investment in equipment far exceeds the building. So the personal side as well. So the school districts, although they're not getting the full 18%, they're getting a huge more in property taxes once investment's brought there because it's brought at a high level and it's not agriculturally exempted. So if that helps.
It's advantageous to the schools as far as their income from those properties. Molly?
Michelle, you probably don't know this, and Harry, you probably may not either, but is there any movement at all to develop south from Indian School on the east side or the west side?
Good question. Yeah, there certainly is interest in those properties. Most of the interest for the large industrial type of users, not to say that southeast corner of Indian School and Cotton Lane, there's potential there that it could get a significant manufacturer there or another FTZ type user. Most of the interest, though, is on that east side and in some right on the west side. And there certainly is some other types of uses that are showing interest at that southeast corner of Indian School and the Loop 303, not necessarily industrial users, so the property's not planned for that.
Would it help at all if we were to designate that early on? Or do we just want to wait to see if someone's going to come and do something with that?
I wouldn't say necessarily on the east side, on the southeast corner of Indian School and Loop 303, but certainly there could be potential there for the southeast corner of Cotton and Indian School.
Mm-hmm. That's really what I'm looking at, because the Indian School south on the east side of 303, that's the Pebble Creek community right there. And right now it's just being farmed.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Or in addition to that, the other parcels, which we have not shown, that are west of the 155 acres and south of the 155
over here,
acres.
yeah.
Those are planned for industrial.
Little interruption.
Uh-oh, sorry.
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Katie.
Oh, hi, Katie.
Oh, Katie.
She knows. She
Thank
knows.
you, Mayor and Council. We don't have any formal applications in, but we have had 2 pre-application meetings, so the information is public on that piece. A large church is looking to locate right here.
Wonderful.
And a gas station is looking to locate right there. Both of those will require a public process, so there will be neighborhood meetings and outreach to the public.
Okay.
We do expect those applications to come in shortly.
Okay, good. Thank you. But nothing on the west side so far. Okay.
So-
Hopefully, if they do build around that area that we own, it'll develop. It'll move eastward to fill in that whole area.
So I'm going to change the order of questions because I have something burning here.
Uh-oh.
So I had people approach me that thought their home values in that section of Pebble Creek that are going to lower no matter what you put on that corner, and especially because that corner in those areas is so close to Pebble Creek that it is going to influence the value of the property. My reaction from working in real estate said, no, it's not going to. But can anybody, do we have the real estate our representative in here at all? Anybody can address that, or can you address that?
Mm.
Or I can address that.
I
'cause
would say while you're.
Or I can address that because the lawyer's looking at me. So I got you.
Well,
I
we
can
can
tell by
answer.
your look on your
Trying to get back
face.
to the
You're
FTZ.
red. You're red in the face. I can see that. Okay, well, since
But it
that's a
has to
question
do
out
with
there, maybe one of these
industrial-
days at one of the work sessions, we could maybe discuss that.
Mayor, could you ask if the zone would devalue the property across the street?
Oh,
Is that okay?
what a brilliant council person I have to the left of me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would you address that
And
question?
when you say across the street, you mean across Indian School that you were just talking about?
Well,
or-
across 303 towards Pebble Creek, right on the corner.
And the way I would answer that is I would say, similar to what the mayor was saying, is that development in the area is going to increase property values in the area because we're going to have people traveling. We're going to have more things to be because there are going to be more major employers there, which means they'll have more opportunity for retail and entertainment, have more opportunity for more homes in the area. And so that's in a general area, that in a general way, that's how I would answer that question. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, good. Thanks.
Sherry?
I have a question similar to what Wally was asking, only I'm looking up towards Camelback.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Pac-Man there where it's cut out, and I'm not quite sure. Yeah, thank you, Wally.
You're welcome.
I'm not, why don't we go all the way to Camelback? It seems like if I'm going to build something, that's good frontage.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the reason why that is shaped the way that it is because you can't actually build on that property other than a parking lot.
Oh.
Of APC.
Because of the APZ, the Arizona, or
Oh.
the Airport Protection Zone,
For Luke.
Oh.
the Accident Protection Zone.
So even manufacturing, because people are congregating there, can't go in that area.
Yes, right there where that line is, that's where you cannot construct a building. Now, you could construct a parking lot, but people really couldn't be employed right there in a building.
And I'll show you the zoning. If I could have Elmo, I'll just show you this real quick. Kind of shows a little bit better. Oh, okay.
There you go.
Okay. Do you see that right there? See that line that
Same
comes
cutout,
right?
yeah.
That's what
Oh,
it's talking
yeah.
about. That's the APZ one.
Okay.
Okay, that makes sense. I just couldn't figure out why it was cut like that when
Yeah.
you wouldn't go to the Camelback. So yeah, I
Right.
appreciate that. No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joe?
There's been a lot of talk, I guess, at the federal level on, I guess, trying to encourage manufacturing inside this country and out. Do you envision any blowback on foreign trade zones? Because that's materials coming from outside to come in to be manufactured, incorporated. Do you see anything possibly down the road that may discourage at the federal level these foreign trade zones?
You know what I would say? I would say no, because I would think that's actually that's preventing companies from actually being able to move overseas and do more and have a more advantageous tax. So I think if you're talking about the current administration, all of the talking points kind of seem like toward making sure that it makes more sense to do business in the United States. So I would say no, that we don't expect that.
Okay, thank you. You might have touched on it, but you're looking at automatically making this a magnetic site. What's the upside of doing this versus the upside of waiting till they apply? Is it timing or go ahead?
Well, it's kind of funny they call it a magnet site because it really is kind of an attraction, and that is because, as I was saying earlier, if that's already federally designated, the property owner can market, and Goodyear can market that property as already designated. So there's less of a time. There's also less question whether they would be able to. That property would be able to do that. User-driven sites are very good too, but I think that's the advantage of having the magnet site is the time that a company can say, okay, well, I can come in there. It's going to be a shorter amount of time, and I've already got the local and federal approvals, which takes time as well.
Just one last question. Is there any way to identify, because we talk about personal property tax, and that usually goes to the county or the state, and we talk about the capital investment, a lot of it may be income-producing equipment, which would be exempt, because even though we do have a use tax, is there any way of being able to identify what one of these projects may generate to the general fund as far as sales tax is concerned?
Sure. I would
Okay.
think that would be absolutely possible. We could do an example of kind of what one has done so far.
Yeah, I want to make sure I understand the question in terms of sales tax or property tax.
Sales tax.
Sales tax.
General fund operating sales tax, which would be ongoing.
Yes. So most projects, that they're manufacturing or distribution, are not going to have necessarily a sales tax component. REI does an ongoing sales tax component because of the internet sales that they have. And those estimates were made, and generally we make those estimates when we submit a proposal for a job creation agreement. We do that economic analysis, so we can get you that information for what we did for REI. Those are going to be the ones that have the ongoing sales tax impact.
Yeah, and I think what we could do is do a model company. Okay, if it had the internet fulfillment component, it might not. If it had this, it would bring in this. If not, and there's going to be a lot of the indirect impact too, which we want to provide you because of the employees, the vendors, the shopping there, and all of that. So,
and the reason why I'm asking is my focus is, and tell me if I'm off, City Attorney, is I think a focus on generating general fund sales tax. That's why when we bring these things, I'd like to know what that impacts are, because to me, that's where, what's the term I want to use? That's where emphasis needs to meet these driving demands that we have out there, since I believe about 45% or greater of our general fund operating revenue comes from sales tax, somewhere in that vicinity. Sure. And the budget manager can straighten that out when she comes up later to talk about that. So again, that's helpful to me on those projects if you can identify some of that. I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Bill?
I've got a couple myself.
Great.
Thanks for coming up and going through this. I think it's important to go back and talk about the FTZ itself. So spec building A is in the existing FTZ. That building, which is not occupied when it's finished, will have a property value associated with it. Does the FTZ rates apply to that empty building?
It's under the spec building policy, correct, that we passed?
It's under, since it's in the magnet site, we went through 3 different scenarios when we first had the policy developed for the foreign trade zone. One of those scenarios, what you see there is a sub-zero scenario, to where we already had improvements there when that original magnet site was done, that our policy required a payment in lieu of taxes or a pilot agreement. So sub-zero has been paying every year what the taxes were at the point that they occupied that building. So those stayed whole. One of the other examples that we shared was when an investor comes in and builds a building spec, and then that building, if it's not occupied after a period of time, generally within the first year, it's going to be assessed. If it's assessed at the total 18% assessment ratio, and then in the future, if a user comes in that qualifies as an FTZ, this is where you have that benefit of attracting investment, getting some taxes on the tax rolls where it was just foreign property in the past, and you get a significant amount of investment. If a user comes in, and that does go down to the 5% assessment ratio, if they qualify. If it attracts someone that doesn't qualify, then of course all of it would be on there. The thing to keep in mind is those taxes, depending on the type of user that we attract, REI, Sub-Zero are great examples because far exceeded, the cost of the building. You attract a significant amount more of taxes. And so my guess is, you would probably even attract more taxes being generated on the tax rolls than when that goes down to the 5%. So that is one scenario, since it was built within a existing magnet site. That was part of our policy to try to attract spec buildings, because we need buildings in our community to be competitive for projects.
You kind of touched on what I was hoping to get to, and I just want to reemphasize it. Just because we're designating an FTZ does not mean that every brick that is built in that FTZ is going to qualify. It's the user that goes into that building.
Exactly.
So we can build 1 million square feet, and if 1 million square feet of user is not FTZ qualified, there is no tax break.
Exactly.
And I think that's really important that we talk about that, so it doesn't appear as though we're giving away the farm.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that, literally on the farmland, but
Well, it was farm area at one time.
but we're not giving it away. We're
Right.
using it is an incentive tool and an attraction piece to bring that in that will then spawn additional development. And I think that was the key. That's what I was hoping to.
Right. It brings infrastructure where many of those smaller ones that are not going to qualify for an FTZ in the future, it's just not part of their business model. It helps develop those smaller parcels, but you don't develop those smaller parcels until you bring a big project that makes a significant investment, that the developer makes a significant investment in infrastructure. Then those parcels become viable, and those certainly will be full taxes because they're not large enough to be FTZ users. And those are, you can see them starting to develop there on the west side. Those will develop, and probably some of those little nodes in the future, I expect, on the east side as well.
And I think that's one of the things that, we're having this discussion years later, but you go back to the agreement that we had to bring Dix in and then REI. Those there were incentives involved in that, but that brought the benefit of bringing the water and the sewer all the way out. Mm-hmm. And we did that years ago. So now we are reaping the benefit of that decision today by now seeing this development occurring on the east side. And that gets lost in this whole conversation that we never talk about, the forward thinking that we had earlier and what it turns into today. So, I appreciate the conversation, and this is one of the few tools that we have to use. For me, when you come back, what would be helpful? I know that there was a preliminary plat or something that kind of outlined what that whole area was going to look like. If we can just get kind of an overlay that showed the street layout and the X number of lots and that kind of thing, that would be helpful instead of just the big red line. But other than that,
yeah,
Sure.
That red line on the east side pretty much follows what the street patterns in the future. If you go up Saraville and then it goes over to Pebble Creek. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's more detail to that, and we'll certainly bring that.
Yeah, and because I think that would have helped with because I too had forgotten about the APZ in that area, and I think that would have been helpful if we had that overlay. We'd have gone, oh yeah, okay.
Okay, gotcha.
But anyway, thanks.
Good question, Bill. Nice statement and a reminder what was put in there. Sherilyn, no? Anything else? I think we've had our
Great. Thank you.
Good job.
a great presentation. Thank you so much.
We went easy on you guys. You were nice. Because we already knew it. Okay.
The council will receive a presentation on the city's status as a community development block grant entitlement community, the process for becoming an entitlement community grantee, or options for future participation in the Cdbg program. Planner Alex Latinsky and Planner Manager Katie Wilkins. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So it is time to review our status as an entitlement community once again. It goes quickly, but it has been 3 years since we've had this discussion.
Oh my gosh.
Our current 3-year cooperative agreement with the county doesn't expire until June 2018, but they have requested we notify them by April of this year on our intentions, which is why we're here tonight. So Alex is going to give you the presentation. I'm going to jump in. Just to let you know, we are going to go over some basics of the programs just because not everyone works with it all the time and for the benefit of the public as well. So I'll give it over to Alex.
Thank you, Katie. So Community Development Block Grant. For everyone who doesn't know what CDBG stands for, that's the number one basic. So the purpose of this work session, like Katie said, we're going to talk about what CDBG is, how CDBG funds are distributed, some options and rules that we have moving forward, and then some advantages and disadvantages to those options. So the purpose of CDBG funding, which is provided by HUD, is to provide decent housing, suitable living environments, and expanded economic opportunities to primarily low and moderate income persons. And there's two main ways that HUD distributes CDBG funds, and that's through the Urban County Program and the Entitlement Community Program. So essentially, the mechanisms of how funds are distributed is, let me use a pointer here. So HUD allocates funding to a recipient, and that's either an urban county or an entitlement community. That community creates a CDAC, which is a Community Development Advisory Committee, which, as you all know, Councilmember Homan is the chairperson of right now for this.
Thank you, Sherilyn.
So this advisory committee reviews applications that are submitted yearly to whichever recipient receives the funding from HUD, and they can decide which projects and programs or subrecipients that apply for application or that apply for CDBG funding gets funded. So that main recipient is responsible for communicating with HUD, a 5-year consolidated plan, an annual action plan. They do end-of-year reporting, environmental reports, or environmental reviews, excuse me, and IDIS reporting is the financial system that HUD uses to track finances. And then HUD audits that recipient directly, and then the recipient audits subrecipients and programs directly. So the Urban County Program is where we sit right now, like I just mentioned. We are part of the CDAC board. You've seen in the past, we've come to you with applications that we'd like to submit to CDAC. Later on, I'll get into some of our history of which applications were funded. So what that looks like right now, where we fit into the puzzle is Maricopa County is the recipient of HUD's annual allocation. And then we are a subrecipient to Maricopa County, so Maricopa County audits us directly. We provide applications for projects and programs. Other groups can apply to Maricopa County to receive funding, and then Maricopa County does a lot of the reporting that goes directly to HUD. So as an entitlement community, the first step is to have a population of over 50,000, which we beat in 2008 originally. So that invitation never expires, which is why we're here today. So what that would look like if we became an entitlement community is we would be in the recipient position, have to do all the reporting and work directly with HUD to process our annual allocation. And then we would create our own CDAC and then distribute our funding accordingly.
And if I can jump in, just so you know, a lot of communities do give funds to subrecipients. For example, nonprofits like Habitat for Humanity might partner on a housing project. Other government agencies like Maricopa County Job Connection to provide employment training. So most communities do give money to subrecipients.
So essentially in this situation, we're cutting out a middleman. So the options on the table would be to decline entitlement status and participate again with the Urban County Program, which would be another 3-year contract, or accept entitlement status and administer the CDBG program ourselves. So I sent out the yellow paper a few weeks ago, and the 3 main focuses I want to talk about tonight are the levels of funding that we would receive, the types of projects and programs, and the administration of the program. So we'll start with the types of projects, and there's a few ways to determine whether a project is eligible. The first, of course, is it eligible? As long as it's not serving a general government purpose, like police operations, it's probably eligible. The second question would be, does it meet the national objective? And to meet the national objective, you either have to serve low to moderate income groups, eliminate slum and blight, and then assist in urgent need. And the urgent need is very rare. I've been told that when Hurricane Katrina happened, that barely any CDBG funding, or if I don't even know if any CDBG funding went to assist with that situation. Sometimes establishing qualifying projects and programs can get a little messy because this is the federal government. So I'm going to let Katie kind of go through some opportunities and some questions that we've heard from you guys in the past about if projects are eligible.
Thank you, Alex. So yeah, we often get questions on, is a project eligible? And we usually give you your favorite answer, it depends. But hopefully this starts to explain a little bit about why it depends. The best way to determine project eligibility is, of course, to start with the 5-year consolidated plan. So say the 5-year consolidated plan said we need to do more for seniors. Well, one, we could choose to do direct senior service programs. So is that eligible? Yes. Which national objective does it meet? Well, it would be in low mod income. And it would probably be either direct benefit, because if you're doing something that directly impacts seniors, that automatically qualifies. But in that other considerations category, you can see there's a public service cap. So only 15% of your funds can go to public services. And then there's some other rules, like you can only fund the first year of a public service program, because they don't want to just continually fund public service programs. You can only use it for 1 year. So those are other considerations, but yes, it's eligible. You might also want to do something like a community center. And again, this starts to depend on, why do you want to build a community center? Which national objective does it meet? So it could fall under low mod income, and if you're doing something like a community center, you would look at the users. So 51% of the users of that community center have to income qualify as low moderate income. So you would have to track the people who use it and determine that they're low mod income. And as you can imagine, for a community like Goodyear, that could actually be difficult to do. The other way we could do it is, maybe it's a slum and blight project. If we build a community center in Loma Linda, which is in our redevelopment area, we're going to attract more people to the neighborhood. They'll use businesses in the area. This will help us eliminate slum and blight. That might be an eligible way to do it. But of course, there's a 30% cap on projects in the redevelopment area. So again, just something to consider as you're moving forward with a project like that. Another example is if you want to do a business incubator. Again, it's kind of like, what are you doing? Is there a vacant commercial building in your redevelopment area, and it would be helpful to rehab it and have something in it? Because you could do it that way. Or if you want to do it as an economic development project, you have to show that you're creating 1 job for every $35,000 of Cdbg investment. And then you have to track that. So again, it just kind of depends on what you want to do. And then the other considerations are, one, every type of project has an affordability period, and it depends on the type of project and how much Cdbg investment. Some projects can have an affordability period of forever. So if you put money into a community center and someday you want to, 30 years down the road, you want to convert it from a community center to something else, you have to pay back that full Cdbg amount. Most projects have some type of limited. So like a housing rehab program we used to run in the city, the person would have to stay in the home for 10 years and we'd forgive it. So most programs don't have a forever affordability period, but of course you want to look into that. And then there's even what I like to call the headline test, where it's just, again, when you're getting audited, would somebody reasonably go and say this is how Cdbg funds should be used? Just for an example, when Pebble Creek Phase 2 was first starting, it was actually in a Cdbg eligible census tract, just because there's 10 years between censuses and when it was building. But of course, anyone would go into this Pebble Creek community and easily see this is not a neighborhood where Cdbg funds should be used. So even though it qualifies, you got to put in the headline test of that's not where we should be using the money. So I'll give it back to Alex.
Thank you. So in both situations of entitlement and urban county program, these 15% and 30% caps do apply. So that's just one thing to note moving forward. And then we can take a look back at the past couple of years of projects we've completed with the urban county. And a lot of them are the low to moderate income direct benefit, which is the water lines. And we've had some unique projects throughout. Okay. So if we became an entitlement program, like Katie said, that 5-year consolidated plan would apply, and then we'd go through the process of creating the CDAC, and the projects must be eligible. So the next item to look at is funding. Taking a look back at the past 10 years, we've been extremely successful with the urban county program. The amount varies year to year based on the scale of projects. Sometimes we were ready to fund a large portion of a water line, and quite often we were fully funded. You can see a few years we did not receive funding, and in the past we've discussed the 1.5 rule, but I'll just recap that again and give you an example. So if we look at 2010-2011, we received $257,000 for the Parks Improvements project. If we had 1.5 times that allocation at the end, or when we were about to apply for the fiscal year 11-12 amount, we couldn't have in our pot of money $385,000. So if we were still underway with the waterline project that happened the previous year, we would obviously have more than the 1.5 allocation. So we were unable to apply in 2011 and 2012. And sometimes it's good to sit out and give other communities a chance to apply. As well as you can see, we have a trend of where if we sit out a couple of years, then we get largely funded the following year, just to kind of even it out, and so we can develop some good projects to work on that we can use quite a bit of funding. And it's important to note here too that becoming an entitlement community, the 1.5 rule still applies. So if we aren't spending our annual allocation, it could affect our future funding allocations. So speaking of allocations, I learned from our local HUD representative that our estimated allocation this time would be $280,000. This number is determined by some calculation of the population size, age of housing stock, and a percent of population below the poverty line. So we do have quite a lower allocation, but it's because we have less of a need for the money. There is a 20% limit on the administration fees that we can use to administer the program. So if we had a program manager, we'd be limited to using $56,000 of that, $280,000 to run the program. And we can also use that for a consultant when creating the action plans, etc. Just so you know, Maricopa County does use the full 20% in the urban county program. So when we receive our funding, we never actually get affected by that 20% rule because it's already coming out of their allocation. So if we use that, we'd have $224,000 left for projects, and then breaking it down by those other caps, $42,000 could be used for public services and $84,000 for slum and blight projects. So looking at some examples of how we can distribute the money, let's say we had another water line project that was about $224,000. We can use that for the water line and pay for someone to administer the program. One of the best benefits of becoming an entitlement community is having the flexibility to control what types of projects we do want to fund. So this next example takes those caps out of the allocation, and then you can see we have $98,000 for other programs like the water line, stuff like that. This next example is a little confusing for me, so I'm going to pass it off to Katie and have her explain it.
Thank you. It's just worth mentioning that there is a program eligible for entitlement communities called the Section 108 Loan Program, and you can borrow up to 5 times your annual allocation for a large project. So if we did have some big, large project we wanted to complete, we could borrow up to 5 times. The 672 is 3 years worth of our allocation, just to throw a figure out at you. There is an interest rate that goes into that. I don't know what it is. I think it's a favorable interest rate, but so that can be beneficial to a community, something that's not available to us as an urban county, but is available to entitlement.
Thank you. So finally, the administration of the program. Once again, I brought up this flow chart to explain, to have as a reference to explain the responsibilities of the program manager. So as the program administrator currently, it takes about 10% of my time to manage the program right now. That's contributing environmental reviews to HUD's, to the Maricopa County's urban county reports that go back to HUD. The same thing for the consolidated plan and some end-of-year reporting documents. There's also quarterly reports that are due to the Maricopa County in order for them to respond to HUD, and then managing the grant as far as contracts go, keeping records, Davis-Bacon, and then financial reporting as well. And then if we look back at this, HUD is, Maricopa County audits us directly, so they've been very helpful in the past of giving us a heads up when they're coming, letting us know what they need to see. If we did accept entitlement, we did some research with other cities to see how much it is to kick off the program, and we've estimated and put in a supplemental request for $120,000. The 5-year consolidated plan would be similar to a CIP, where we'd have to evaluate affordable housing, the homelessness circumstances in Goodyear, and develop priorities, activities, and community development needs within Goodyear. As well as an annual action plan. The first time to everything to get these started just takes out that initial investment of putting in the time and the research. Impediments to fair housing, a full study would need to be done on all of Goodyear for that. So that is an initial cost that we've, how we've calculated that $120,000. And then, ongoing, we estimate that we need a full-time employee dedicated to the program. Like I showed in the flow chart, that staff person would be responsible for directly speaking to HUD and putting all these consolidated reports, annual action plans, and reporting, as well as auditing any subrecipients we have. So if Habitat for Humanity was in Goodyear, we'd have to audit them directly and respond to HUD on how those projects are going. Fair housing is another large component of CDBG funding. So we'd be responsible for funding that staff person to go to trainings, fielding all of the complaints. HUD does look at fair housing and wants to make sure that the entitlement community is spending money on fair housing training. And then, like I said, HUD audits the city directly. So just looking back at our options again, we can continue participation with the Urban County program for another 3 years and then reevaluate once that contract is complete. And some pros and cons here, as I've mentioned before. So the county does most of the work, and it can be managed by our current staff since we have been doing it for the past couple of years. However, we can't use any of the funds we receive to pay for that person to manage the program. The city might receive more funds through the Urban County program. As you can see from our historic allocations, we have received more than $280,000 in the past. So we are the negative to that is that we might not be guaranteed funding each year, like the entitlement community program. And we can be creative and develop discrete projects once a year, but we're also limited by the county's priorities. So then the other option is to become an entitlement community. And the city is guaranteed funding each year, but it's also a game of use it or lose it. If we're not using up all our funds, HUD can reevaluate our allocation and lessen, or we could receive more in the future. We can use up to 20% of funds for administration costs, but we'd still need to upfront the cost for initial implementation of the program. And finally, there's a lot more flexibility in the types of projects that we can fund, but due to our limited funding amounts and a lack of experienced nonprofit companies in Goodyear, we find that we're somewhat restricted in the flexibility of the program or of the projects. Excuse me. So therefore, we recommend continuing participation with the Urban County program for this, at least for the next 3 years, and that way we don't have to upfront that $120,000 and a full-time employee, and we can still continue to apply for funds with Maricopa County until that expires. And
the one other thing I wanted to add to the end of the presentation is the city of Buckeye has also been invited to be entitlement, and we spoke to our staff counterparts at Buckeye, and they indicated to us that they are planning on staying with the Urban County program. We haven't heard what their allocation is. 3 years ago, they had a very similar allocation amount to us, but we haven't heard what it is now.
So that concludes our presentation.
Turn it over to council questions. Bill?
Thanks for the presentation. I'm sorry. I had, you were bouncing all over the place. The slides kept changing back and forth, so this is what I was concerned about earlier. So we didn't have a natural break in the middle, so I'm not even sure this is going to make sense. So I'm going to start at the bottom. You talked about all these administrative things that we do and that we'll need to do. And it sounded as though we have to generate the information for the county anyway. Is that?
I can jump in here.
Next slide, I think, is what we're talking about.
Thank you, Councilmember Stipp, Mayor Lord. There are portions of things we do. So, for example, the 5-year consolidated plan is really the big one for the one-time cost the first time you're doing it. So we participate, and some of you who've been here when we've done it may remember, where we'll send out a little survey to our community, and we came before you, here's projects we want to do. So it was really focused on the projects and programs. That portion wouldn't be so different. What we haven't ever done is really analyze needs for homeless populations, affordable housing analysis, the impediments to fair housing. It's those portions of it that we've never done before.
And are those required?
Yes.
Of the entitlement community?
That's HUD.
Okay. No, I just want to make sure I tracked that I understood it. So that this second question may then become pointless, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So if we were to become entitlement, and I'm imagining that the Mobile area census tract probably meets majority of the requirement, can we use all of our allocation to fund road maintenance, public service, et cetera, that would offset our general fund expenditure in that one area? The amount of money that we spend to maintain the roads, the amount of money that we spend to maintain public safety, couldn't we use that allocation in just that one area?
Thank you, Mayor Lord. Councilmember Stipp, no, you cannot use Cdbg funds for operation and maintenance.
So anything we do to the road, I mean, we're doing it for water lines, that's operation and maintenance too. So help me.
And it's a fuzzy line, and I'm not an expert in it, but basically completely reconstructing something can be funded. So when you're completely replacing a water line, that's eligible. repairs and maintenance is not eligible. So if you're completely ripping out a street and building a brand new street, that would be eligible. Repairing, just doing like a mill overlay type thing would not be eligible.
Okay, thanks.
Next. Joe?
Going for the upside and the downside, I don't see why we should go and change from what we've been doing. We're right now with the county's running it for us, right? Yeah. From my perspective, I don't see any additional advantage the way you've laid this out. They've got the resources. They got, and then you mentioned we have to add another full-time employee if we would bring this on. Is that correct? Yeah. From my perspective, I would, and again, following everything, the advantages and disadvantages, I would prefer to keep with the county.
Sherry?
I think I'm on the same page with Councilman Pizzillo. When I'm looking at this and I'm looking at the amounts, and I remember when we had to turn the money back because we couldn't get participation, it was with the facade program. But then we look at those couple years, we got really big amounts. When we got those big amounts, we didn't have to pay interest on those like we would if we were an entitlement city, right?
That is correct.
Okay. So we have the ability, if we have a really big project, to say we're going to apply for this project and like the water, or get the big amount, or like the water line, split it over a couple sessions, like phase it out. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And from looking at that, and just from the statistics from when you've come before and talked about ideas for programs, I think the problem with our community, it's a very good problem to have. We have some needs, but since it can't do maintenance and it can't do programming for more than a year, no matter how great the program is, I don't think we want to start up a great program and then either, I don't want to say dump it on a nonprofit who may not have the funding to keep it going, or we don't have the funding to keep it going. So I think I'm with the keep it with the entitlement. And then as you and your staff can help us find projects to do, even if we spread it out, I think that's the way to go right now, because we have actually, I want to say, probably got more than our share in some of these years. So I think we're doing fine, and I think you guys are doing a great job as it is.
Sherilyn?
Well, as we discussed this the last time, I had pretty strong feelings about it, and I don't know that I feel as strongly about it, but I still think at this point of our development that the entitlement program is the way for us to go. It's very complicated. And so someone really has to get up to snuff. Katie is quite knowledgeable in the area and is a great resource to have. She doesn't have time for this anymore. I mean, that's just the fact of it. I mean, she's still, I believe, is advising Alex. Alex is really the staff that is doing the detail work and the stuff on this. But it is complicated. And the people at the county have 17 years experience, and they're very knowledgeable. They're going to keep us out of trouble, and we know. I believe Buckeye this year had a major project, and they got like $598,000 this year. We just went through this process, and all of this is, of course, we don't know what's going to go on in Washington. We don't know how these kinds of programs are going to continue to work and what the funding is going to be. This is the time of year where we spend a lot of time down at Central and Van Buren going over these things. Thank you, Alex. But it's because this is when we're actually determining the allocation of funds. And then, of course, we have to say, this is what we'd like to see happen. And then we have to say, but if we don't get enough money, this is where we have to take money away. Or if we get more money, this is where we'd like the money to go. And I believe last year we were very fortunate that we did get $140,000 for, and that was for one portion of the water lines. There's still 2 sections that we need to look to fix. So given the uncertainty and given the skill that is needed, I really think we are benefiting from being in the entitlement side.
Thank you, and thank you for your work on that committee. I really appreciate it. You do a good job. Wally?
Well, I agree with Sherilyn because Sherilyn took my spot. I was very happy to give it to her.
I don't like Central and Van Buren either.
No, it's just, no.
And won't that be for the next new person too?
Oh, maybe. The neatest thing about having the county do all of our work. We compete with all the other little cities, and it's really interesting to hear what their projects are and what their priorities are. And as Sherilyn and Alex mentioned, the CBDG committee itself is made up of council members from the cities, and they in turn work together and try to spread the money out. There's never enough money for all the projects to fund completely, and a lot of times there's not enough money to fund all the projects that are put forward, and we never know how much we're going to get, so it's very hard to even budget it. If we were an entitlement city, I don't know that we would know right away how much we're going to get either with the climate in DC. I know every time we go back to Washington, we speak with our legislators asking them to please continue the CBDG funds and increase them, because the larger cities that have historically a lot of homeless population and they have the need for additional housing get the chunk of the money from DC. We're lucky we get any, really. And I just think we should stay the way we are. If and when we ever get big enough and the need is there, we'll always have the opportunity to change that designation. But for the foreseeable future, I think we should stay like we are.
Joanne?
Thank you. You know, I think when I was looking at the listing, I think I was on for 2 years, and 10 and 11 was my time at the committee.
Sounds like a prison term, girl.
No,
I followed Joanne, so.
No, but you know, and the thing is, over these last 10 years, I mean, really, the critical needs have been the water line replacement, some park improvements. I mean, there haven't been a lot of things that, you know, we've been able to do. And I agree. I think that it was funny because when I saw this come up, I thought, oh, they're going to finally kick us out. Because I kept thinking, you know, I know we get the invitation. And because of our population, I kept thinking they're going to be kicking us out. But I do agree. I think we need to go another 3 years and let it work itself out. But two questions I do have. As we look at scenarios that I don't know if this funding is allowed for, and the difference between entitlement versus what we are currently in. When we talk about slum and blight, if we were to discuss, say, the Superfund site, and we were to say, not creative genius here, okay? If we were to say, take this area and let's make it the city's cemetery because we don't have one, okay?
I knew you want a cemetery.
Well,
I knew it. I knew it would sneak in the
cemetery on a Superfund site. I mean, come on. You know, I mean, this would be. Would this be? I mean, come on. I mean, would this really be? Would this be a place that you could actually use funding because it's a slum and blight property? That's. Forget the cemetery, but that is my question. Is this where you would be able to be allowed to use money on an area like that, whether it was a brown field or a Superfund site? Do you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So would that be?
Thank you, Council Member. The short answer is yes, it would be eligible.
Okay.
It's probably about finding the right use of the money. You know, I mean, again, it's in our redevelopment area. Having, you know, getting rid of a vacant property is a benefit.
It is.
You know, okay. So it would, you know.
That's why I said, you know, creative. The other question then, versus when you, and maybe I heard you wrong, when you spoke about if we were an entitlement city, that money being able to be, would it be able to be used for either public-private partnerships or nonprofits like, say, Southwest Lending Closet desperately needed that new parking lot? Would that be something, or the New Life Shelter maybe needed a whole new, you know, building? Would that be funding that you would be able to use this for? That you wouldn't be able to use if you're an urban county, but you would be able to use if you're an entitlement city. So that's my question.
The eligible projects are the same, whether you're with the urban county or on entitlement. Southwest Lending Closet could go to the urban county today and submit an application.
So it wouldn't come out of us specifically. Oh, Okay.
Well, it depends what they're doing. Again, basically, recently the Maricopa County made a decision to take 15% of the CDBG funds, that public service cap, and set that aside for public service projects. And they want to focus those toward homelessness prevention type projects. So one, it would be the question is it a public service project they're doing, or is it they need a new facility and it's more of a capital project they're doing? Again, what exactly is the project? So where is the money eligible?
So the funding is the same regard. the funding
eligibility
is the same. All right.
Yeah.
That was all. Thank you.
It's been a long time since I sold real estate, but I know when I did sell real estate, and it was under HUD, they come out and designated affordable housing. So say you have townhouses, okay? So they would go to townhouse communities in the area that I sold in and designate so many of those townhouses affordable, which changes the income of people who live there, and it's a challenge. And you have nowhere to turn on this. And so some of it's good, but in a lot of neighborhoods, it's not good because you have such a different level in income and in social life and in customs and everything. So whenever I see HUD, I was very fortunate not to have that happen in the particular community I was in, but I saw the other communities, and it was a challenge for the communities, and especially in condos where people had made an investment. The relationship between the people, they were not pleased with the fact of the matter that would happen. Now, is there a good in it for people? Yes. I mean, the emotional, the religious, and the moral issue and all of that, I can understand that. And I'm not fighting against that. I know we do sometimes have to do things like that to help people in life. But when you do bring HUD into it, you have to think about the income level of this city and the cost of housing in this city. In our future, we will have multi-dwellings more than we have now. So I'm right now would like to stay with the urban. So I guess we'll decide that at another council meeting, won't we? We're going, right? Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, Katie, you lean forward, so go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just going to say, at some point, basically, we will tell the county the direction that council seems to be going. And so at some point at a future agenda, we will have the actual 3-year cooperative agreement that council will need to take action on.
Good. Thank you very much. Okay, that is what we're going to end now. We're going to have a special meeting, and we're going to adjourn this meeting.
One more.
We have one more, sorry.
All right, it's Lori.
Where am I?
Budget. Oh, Bill said we have a break.
Yeah, just a minute, because I don't have a page
Financial
here.
forecast, okay.
I'm
Make
sorry,
it
I
good,
don't have
Lori.
it on my budget.
Make it up if you have to.
Yeah, we want good
Meeting.
news.
Special meeting. Oh, she had it up there. I'm sorry, I had it on the wrong area, so. Go ahead, Lori. Let me just, yes. You want a break? Yeah, so,
Good, thank you, Bill.
all right, would you like to take it before I introduce Lori? Would that work? All right. Lori, I'm sorry, you just have to sit there for about 10 minutes. All right, thank you.
Well, we'll let you move if you want to.
I might start coughing if I move.
My Fitbit's telling me I have to get up and walk.
The main focus of today's presentation is looking at the revenue side of preparing for developing that fiscal year 18 budget. In December, we presented to you on the beginning balance, which is a major one-time resource that will be going into the FY18 resources. And then today we're doing the 5-year forecast. We've added the specific dates for the balance of the calendar relative to the budget process meetings. There was a change in meeting times in March that we needed to see before we could calendar this out. So you'll see on March 21st, we'll be doing both the compensation benefits and looking at self-insurance. And then we'll do the funding request overview. We'll be looking at, you'll be getting information on the CIP project requests and the supplemental requests at that point in time. Then in April 10th, we'll do a draft budget on enterprise funds, the 17th draft budget for general fund and other funds, including the CIP. And then we have a time set aside that we could have a third meeting if needed to go through the draft budget. And then, of course, we go into the steps of legal adoption of the budget after that. Oops. So we're going to go through a couple things in the presentation we made in December on the fund balance, beginning fund balance. You asked for some additional information. I'm going to go ahead and review that with you as the first point of business today. Then we'll go through an update of the FY17 revenues and initial estimates for the next year's revenues. We'll look at them both on an ongoing and a one-time basis. And then we'll talk about the competing demands on those resources. And then we have a few slides on the 5-year forecast. We really made the section on the revenue estimates the primary focus of today's meeting after hearing some of the comments and suggestions at last Monday's work session. So we'll be kind of following through with that and have kind of de-emphasized the 5-year forecast at this point in time. So in terms of the beginning balance, if you'll remember when I was here in December, we reviewed the increase in the basically this year's beginning balance, which will become a one-time resource for preparing next year's budget. We identified that there was a $10.3 million increase, and that comes from $3.9 million in revenues that were higher than expected and $6.4 million in expenditures that were lower than expected. What you asked for at that meeting in December was to see the fund balance in its components. And so what we have here is what is this year's beginning fund balance. The first 3 items are what were included in this year's budget. In other words, they were planned and budgeted and used in this year's budget. The first section of that was $30.7 million in fund balance that carried over from the prior year. And that was primarily came from the contingency in that prior year, which was $16.6 million in 16. So that funded the first $16.6 million of this year's $17.8 million contingency. And then there were savings in expenditures and revenues as well. There was also $15 million in the budgeted beginning fund balance that was associated with the carryovers that came from 16 to 17. And then we didn't program slightly less than $100,000 when we prepared the FY17 budget. So those items, those first 3 items are things that are backing expenditures that were already in this year's budget. So then those items we just went over with these unanticipated savings of that $10.3 million added to those other items makes our beginning balance $56.1 million. There was a statement or a thought at the last meeting that maybe you would be seeing information on the asset management fund balances. They are in their own individual funds in order to protect them for the purpose they were intended. So we transfer the resources out of the general fund into individual funds. So there's a fleet asset management fund, a fire asset management fund. So there's individual funds that are holding those resources and capture those expenditures. So that's why you're not seeing those here in this fund balance. So if there's, pardon me? Correct, it's not part of those numbers. I don't know if there's any questions on the fund balance explanation.
Go ahead.
Okay. All righty, now to get into revenues. We'll start by just reminding you of where general fund revenues come from. Essentially, the first 50% of our general fund revenues approximately are from the non-construction sales tax. And of that, 40% of that number is from the retail sales tax. Then if you include the construction sales tax, the state shared revenues, and the primary property tax, you're looking at almost 90% of our general fund revenue coming from those sources. So that's kind of where we're focusing on this initial look at revenues, are those big items. So I'll start by just giving you a quick update on how revenue is trending this year. Non-construction sales tax is running ahead of prior year and ahead of this year's budget that's looking very healthy. So that's 50% of the general fund revenue. That other kind of the state shared revenues, which are about a quarter of our revenues, will be near budget at year end, as they typically are. And primary property tax, which is almost 10%, will also be basically at budget. So those big pieces, a large chunk of them is not expected to vary from current year budget. So what that means in terms of dollars and cents, we're looking at, in our initial estimates, as I said, we're performing about 5% over the prior year in terms of sales tax. And these numbers were prepared based on October results. Performance is a little better since then. But that would equate to a $1.5 million increase if we estimate at 5% over the prior year in the current year. And then next year, we're looking at initially a 4.5% estimate or growth rate over this year's estimate. So that $1.5 million that we would generate this year would go into one-time resources for next year, and we would have $3.5 million in new ongoing revenues that we're anticipating next year. State shared revenues are uncertain. As you know, there was a legislative change last year that changes how the population formula is calculated. This will be our first year where we're getting into whatever the cycle is going to become for that. It is possible that we will not have information on that state shared revenue until after you would be prepared to act on the tentative budget. So we'll continue to monitor that as we go. So right now, it's kind of an uncertain range for us in preparing the estimates. And then property tax, the base can only grow 2% a year. And then there's an additional increase related to new construction. So it's only about a $0.4 million increase in revenue with the property tax. And that's just the primary property tax that supports the general fund. On the one-time side, the 2.5% construction sales tax, there's another 1% that must be dedicated to the impact fee program. The 2.5% is a one-time resource used in our budget. It is ahead of budget this year. It's very near last year at this point in time, within about $50,000. With that information, we're estimating an increase of $1 million in this year's estimate, which will become a one-time resource for preparing next year's budget. And then we're using $4.2 million as the tentative estimate. That's essentially the lowest construction sales tax collection in the last 3 years. It's because, again, we are conservative in here. Construction sales tax is very volatile. And then the other one-time revenues would be specific to projects that are in the CIP where somebody has contributed to a specific project. And so those resources will be tied directly to the project they're supporting. So to kind of summarize what we just went over for you in terms of new resources that would be available for funding next year's budget, $3.5 million in new sales taxes over and above the current year, over the current year budget. State shared, we're just saying up to $1 million, and we'll continue to monitor that and work on that one. And property tax at about $400,000, giving us about almost $4 to $5 million in ongoing new revenues. On the one-time side, the $4.2 million in construction sales tax, and then the items we just talked about, the $2.5 million that we would be increasing this year's revenue estimates would become a resource for the one-time next year, giving us $6.7 million in new resources. So moving.
I think I see some really red faces here.
I get one more slide on this revenue, and then how about we do that? So moving forward from here, we'll obviously update these revenue estimates. There's a few things that will help us. Like I said earlier, we did these based on October. We know November and December have done better than happened in the first few months of the year. I do want to caution you. I know you recently received the December sales tax information. Last year, December's growth rate was very low, so it may appear that the growth rate is high, but it was growing off a kind of a dip in the traditional growth rate in December. So we may not see that high of a percentage growth when we get to next month. And so that's what we'll be looking for, both what happened relative to that December, and we'll have the holiday sales activity. We'll continue to look for information on state shared. Within a week, we should have the information on assessed valuations, so we'll be able to finalize the property tax estimate, which is important for the operating budget, but it's also equally important for the capital budget because that is underlying our assumptions that we made about our potential to do bond funding in the future. So we'll start to have better information for that as well. And then same thing on more months of sales tax will help us on the one time. And we'll continue to refine this year's revenue and expenditure estimates, and that will generate more than likely more one time for next year. So we had questions on revenue?
Bill?
Oops.
Okay, so you're showing 6.7 for one time for FY18. What happened to the 10.3 that we started with?
This is just the new revenues. Right. In a little while, we'll show you a slide that has the other resources, which would be the beginning balance that would be rolling over.
Okay, so
this is just the new revenues. It's not all the resources.
All right, yeah, thank you. That's important. Then the question I had about the sales tax. Your slide showed the budgeted amount for non-construction sales tax was $45.1 million. So what was the non-construction sales tax for FY16?
What I have that, I didn't bring the dollar amount with me. What I have are the growth rates. FY16's growth rate was less than 5% over the prior year. So it's around, Mary Kay, do you know the number?
Yeah, I didn't mean, I'm not trying to stump you. Let me, while you're looking, or let me just kind of roll this around. So if FY16 resulted in 3.9 million additional revenue increase as a result of sales tax, which is that non-construction sales tax whole, I would assume. Is that correct?
No, the 3.9 from last year. That was about $1 million. It was just under $1 million in non-construction sales tax and just under $1 million in construction sales tax. So it was 900,000 was non-construction sales tax. 0.7 was construction sales tax. 1.1 was development related revenues, and then 700,000 was related to a reimbursement. So that whole 3.9 did not come from sales tax. It came from all the revenue sources.
Okay, so for FY17, we're currently ahead, and you're planning, I think your slide said 4.5% increase for
we're doing
the assumption.
For FY17, we're assuming 5% over last year, and for FY18, we're assuming 4.5% over this year. So
over this year's budget, not this year's actuals.
I'm sorry, for next year's budget.
Next year's budget.
4.5 over this year's estimate.
Over this year's estimate.
So not over this year's budget, over this year's increased estimate.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Joe?
And to just get your earlier question, the the non-construction sales tax last year was $41.4 million. And we're estimating $43.5 million this year.
So it's up a little bit.
Okay. Thanks, Lori. I didn't mean to put you through those gymnastics.
Pardon me?
I didn't mean to put you through gymnastics.
Oh, no, no problem. I should have remembered that I had it sitting right here next to me. That's why I brought the book with me.
That's why I figured I could ask.
So I don't have to remember all the numbers.
You're always prepared.
I think you got part of the question that I was going to ask that Bill got, but I want to make sure that I brought this up at our last meeting is when we look at total one-time money, on how it gets allocated. I know you're going to have the 10.3 in there. I know the ballpark set aside, which is used for one time. There's a certain portion of that will be, again, going somewhere, maybe for CAP. You've got the set aside for the police and library. All that piece will, all those numbers will be identified, which is going to be a sizable amount over 6.7. Because I know you have to fund the replacement equipment with that money and a couple other things and maybe some capital projects. So I think it's very helpful to see the entire pie and then where it's all going to see what's left. One time, I think you're going to have a bit. My concern, as I mentioned in an earlier presentation, is your ongoing. And, even if you have 4.5, let's split the difference between where you think it's going to be and where it actually ends up. You still have the state legislature. Now, maybe the bills in there right now aren't going to be as negative as an impact as possibly we were looking at last time, but you still got to potentially hit on that as well. So, again, the same concept as I mentioned before, when you have the 4.5, 4.8, whatever that ongoing new money happens to be, all the competing factions, whether it's the half of the other piece of the library or the half of the other piece for the police, whatever it's fighting for, if you could list those, it would be very helpful because my gut tells me so you're going to have more than 4.5% of requests. I could be wrong, but my gut tells me you're going to have significant more than that.
And as soon as we're all done with these questions, I'll go over that for it with you.
Okay, thank you.
Sherry?
I just have a question on one of your assumptions. It says for the $900,000 for the state shared revenues, it says uncertain due to legislative changes. There hasn't been any bills. I don't know if Rob's here or if Brian knows. Nothing's been dropped yet, or has there been something dropped for that?
There's something in the paper this morning on it.
And just to clarify, that's the legislative changes that happened last year that are changing how state shared revenue is being distributed and how population is being determined. That's the legislative change.
That's an increase for us, though.
Pardon me?
That would be an increase for us.
It was an increase for us in this year's budget. What we don't know is what that population mix will look like under this new environment where they're doing population estimates each year. We haven't had that experience before, so we don't know how the individual populations will be grown.
Do we know when we get
this here?
Oh.
We don't.
And if I may, Mayor, if we could bring Rob up, because it can get a little bit complicated on why there is some uncertainty this coming year. So, Rob, if you could address that.
Saved by the bell, Rob.
Yeah. So, Rob, what are they doing?
Sorry, I walked in just now, so yeah. You were asking about state shared revenue. And
is there has anything been dropped? I guess there was. I must have missed it.
I saw something in the paper this morning on shared revenue and
what are they doing to us?
Ask for.
Well, as far as I think Lori was addressing the last year, obviously there was the change with the legislation with where each year we'll use our census estimates for population rather than going off of either the decade census or the mid-decade census. Each year we'll get new numbers, so we won't know those until into the process, and that's why we won't know our specific number. As far as specific other threats out there for state shared revenue, I mean, there's probably some minor issues at this point. I don't think there's anything that's going to be extremely significant that we know of. The governor's budget proposal did have some monies that were going toward the universities for capital improvements, and I think the total amount is $37 million of TPT revenue, and of that portion it would be $6.5 million that would be distributed to cities and towns. So we're looking at whether there's a way to peel out that money that would otherwise be dedicated to cities and towns, but would be a pretty small number. And then other than that, I mean, there's some other potential things out there related to, and there's continues to be the threat related to Senate Bill 1487 from last year, where if a city or town is there's a complaint filed against them, then if the Attorney General determines that that is a legitimate complaint, that a city or town did something that violates state constitution or state law, that they could withhold state shared revenues. But as of right now, I don't think we know of any other significant threats out there. It's just that number is not going to be known until we know what that estimate number is.
Okay, I appreciate that. It just seemed like an awful wide swing from zero to almost $1 million. So I was just trying to figure out if there was something out there we should be concerned about.
Follow up.
Yeah, follow up here. You have a
I have
follow
a
up
question with Rob, if I may.
Yeah.
For this.
Is it a follow up on this?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, go ahead.
Is there any movement at all to redo the impact fees?
There aren't any specific discussions right now. There's nothing that's been dropped related to that. I think it's something that's potential
Could you
for the
repeat
future.
her question for the public? So
Related to the impact fee legislation that passed a few years ago, and there was a moratorium that nothing could change in 3 years after that was passed. So now we've reached a point where there could be changes related to impact fees, but there hasn't been any specific discussions about anything that's looking to come
Bill,
forward.
you had a follow up on that one?
So if we know our population hasn't decreased, and if there isn't any imminent threat to state shared revenue that we know of for sure, I think it's a pretty safe assumption that that number isn't going to be zero. So it's probably, will it be 800, 900, or 1 million? I think that's probably the end that we're talking about, not the zero end.
Correct.
Yeah, while we know our population hasn't decreased, it is a little bit more complicated than that because last year's estimate didn't factor in our actual census that was conducted. And so in other words, we may level off a little bit from last year to this year just for our census estimate because the new estimate could actually factor in, or will, I should say, actually factor in the census that was conducted. So the estimate last year may have been a little higher than what our estimate will be now, factoring in the census that we actually did, if that makes sense.
Federal census, can you clarify that?
Yeah, it's due to the U.S. Census. It's the U.S. Census estimates rather than like the MAG or the state demographic estimate.
Right. So the several $1 million that we spent to do a special census,
Yeah, I mean,
we're not going to count that now? Is that what you're telling me?
well, we are. I mean, we did this last year. We if we wouldn't have done that census really provided us at the time this legislation didn't exist. So from our perspective, we really had no choice but to go out and do that census. Otherwise, we could have been stuck still using our numbers from the decennial census where we're quite a bit lower. So at that point, we really determined that we didn't have a choice but to go out and do that census. As we then compromised and worked with the other cities, we were looking at the best solution going forward for everyone. And it was determined that really it didn't make sense to keep the system we were using. And as part of a compromise, we agreed to move forward using the annual census estimates. And there was a lot of components to that agreement, included some additional MAG monies we received and some other things. But yeah, I mean, it is possible that we level off some in our population this year.
Is it possible that we will, I guess, level off? Yeah, that answers the question. All right. Thanks.
Any other questions? Thank you, Rob. Appreciate it.
Alrighty. And if you'll recall, last year we used the census pickup as one-time revenue because of the uncertainty.
Yeah, I remember that.
Any others? Okay. Alrighty. So now we'll walk through what are the competing demands for the resources we just talked about. So we talked about $4 to $5 million in new ongoing resources. And what we have here is more than $12 million worth of interest in those resources. Kind of categorize them into two groups. The first are kind of base budget changes or existing agreements. The police and fire MOU will be about $1.4 million next year, but an increase. The public safety pension rates have gone up substantially as a result of a case that was lost that impacts the portion of the pension that may be paid by employees. So our share is going up as a result of that, plus just the annual adjustment to actuarial analysis has increased our pension rates as well. Non-represented compensation has not yet been decided and is something you'll be looking at in March. We've gone through an initial look at supplemental requests, and we've identified about $1 million in items that we believe should be funded. Things such as water rate increase impact on our purchases of water, cost increases in something like the jail contract. So those types of things that are pretty much things that we need to do. The net increase related to the library, what we've shown there is net new. So essentially that's assuming what we set aside this year in this year's budget towards the library will reduce or is there and available. So it's another 4.4 or $400,000 that we'd need to take out of next year's or ongoing revenues to fund that fully. And this is a high estimate of the amount that the contingency could go up. If we increase the amount of O&M spending, it also increases that contingency. The other group I've shown here, and so each of those items where we know them, we've assigned a value. The op costs or the operating costs set aside, the plan would be for that to be at $0.9 million next year, which is basically the net of adding the $1.25 million and then taking out the police and library money out of that. There is an interest in adding that second police squad, and again, that is the amount that would be new in next year's budget because we did set aside some this year. The ambulance program that's being discussed, the net would be about $100,000. It's important to note, though, that is assuming a full year of operation. We will still have to go through what the impact would be. We would probably have to hire staff next year in July of 19 or 18. So there could be some additional costs associated with staffing that would not have a revenue offset because we'd be just bringing them on to do the training and getting the equipment. Additional fire station staffing is a possibility. We've talked about the CAP, SRP project and the potential for a general fund a contribution there. And then the other supplemental requests that don't fit into that kind of obligations category are around $4 million. Just by way of comparison, in fiscal year 16, you funded $1.2 million in ongoing supplementals from the department requests. And last year, excluding the police squad, you funded $2.2 million in supplemental requests.
Molly?
On your existing priorities, I don't see the replacement of Fire Station 181 anywhere.
That would be a one-time. That'll be on a future slide. This is
so
just
that's
the
how you
use
do
of
it
the
on the
ongoing
one-time
resources.
Well, someone's going to ask that, I'm sure. That's why I wanted it clarified, because it would be just one-time expense. So we would just be building the building. Everything else is in place. Okay, thanks.
Bill?
I'm not going to wait.
Oops. Sorry.
We were having a little side conversation, and so I'm not going to wait on it. The contingency increase you're showing is ongoing. Now, our current contingency is 16.8, I think, something like that.
Councilman, we use the increase in the contingency we take out of ongoing resources. What we'll do is we'll take the $17.8 million that's in this year's budget for the contingency, and we'll roll it forward into next year, and that'll fund the first $17.8 million. Then we take the increase to fund it at the full 25%, we take out of ongoing resources. That's a practice we could change. It is not $17.8 million in ongoing resources. It is a $17 million one-time amount of money. So that's certainly something that the council could recommend that we do, or that we could move forward with, is consider that increase in the contingency a use of one time.
Yeah. Because you have, for anyone paying attention, the 17.8
yes
is a bucket of money that's filled with $17.8 million real dollars. And that is put in place in the event that the city catastrophically falls apart and we needed to fund 25% of our budget. So if we need to increase that dollar amount, and we need to do that by, say, $2 million, we would drop $2 million real dollars into that bucket. And we wouldn't need to do that again the following year, or the following year, or the following year, would we?
Well, each year our base budget grows. So if our base budget grows by 10 million, we'd have to increase the contingency by 2.5 million.
Correct.
So that 2.5 million would go into the bucket. So the this year's bucket is there. We just have to add another increment to it each year.
And we consider that ongoing instead of one time?
We have considered that the case in last year's budget process. We treated that as an ongoing. As I said, I don't think we have to do it that way because it is just a bucket of money. So we could certainly consider that a one-time use of resources.
Because I think there's some probably philosophical discussion at one point that somebody probably a lot smarter than me needs to have is how big does that number really need to be? We can over contingency. We can have too much sitting in that fund and we can literally choke ourselves. So I think it's worth a discussion at some point, maybe not tonight, about is this the best use of $2 million of ongoing money as opposed, because we're going to look at a slide in a little bit that's going to show $16 million or something of new one-time money. Doesn't make sense that we choke ourselves out on ongoing when we've got this one time. Now, as Joe will point out, eventually one time will go away. But when one time goes away, our increase in I would offer that the increase in our base budget would flatten as well. So we won't see that $2 million. We won't see a $10 million increase to the general fund when the one time flattens out. We won't be in that hyper growth mode. So, and again, I think it's a philosophical discussion. We're going to probably beat it up over dinner tonight, but I think it's worth a discussion, and I hope that staff takes it away. And because we've not had that discussion. We've always had this 16. It was at 12 million one year, and we dumped 4 million in.
We had a discussion this year about how much is definitely necessary, right?
Yeah.
You remember we talked about
3 months.
Yeah, and so we did have that discussion, and that was sort of helping us with a particular problem we were having at that time. We could use that money for something else. So we've had it, but maybe we've never really made a policy or...
Well, now the policy discussion is, do we take one time or do we take ongoing?
We've not had that discussion.
Correct.
Where did it?
That's what I'm saying.
You did adopt financial policies last year in June, and setting the contingency at a 3 months of the operating, the first 3 months of operating expense is what you set that policy at. It doesn't mean you cannot change that policy, but that is your current policy. We implement that. It's the first 3 months. We implement it just as 25% of the budget.
So I did remember something on that. Joe, yes. Oh, wait a minute.
And just real quickly, it used to be a 4 months. So
Yes,
council
it did.
make the policy decision to lower that down to 3 months because it felt like at that time, and I want to say it was about 3 years ago, where it felt like 4 months was exorbitant. So council did make that decision. And as Lori pointed out, it is up to council's discretion as far as what the amount should be.
We talked about other cities and how much they have. I mean, we talked about a lot of circumstances surrounding that. Joe?
No, that's a good discussion there, Councilmember Stipp. The one thing that I would say is the reason we went from 4 to 3 and we were a little hesitant on that is we got to watch our bond rating. Bond rating is real important, and they're looking for what kind of reserves we have in case something goes south. And unfortunately, here in Arizona, we rely on very unsteady sources of revenue called sales tax. Sales tax tends to fluctuate. So you've got to be careful. And what I really appreciate what this council has done as far as the policy is concerned, we match ongoing with ongoing expenses, one-time money with one-time expenses. And fortunately, when the Great Recession hit, we were pushing close to, I believe, $20 million in construction sales tax that overnight dropped to $6 million. If we were using that for anything other than one time, we would have been a world of hurt. So again, we got to take all that in consideration, make sure that our bond representatives, when we have that discussion, we've got to be careful. If we had steadier sources of income, I probably wouldn't feel as uncomfortable with lowering it, but because of the fluctuation in sales tax, and we saw it's 51% of our general fund operating revenue, and that is not a steady source. And our property tax, which is probably our most steady source, is like 9%. So it's, but the question I have, just not to get too far off, public safety pension, is that a one-time contractual hit? Or is that something that's going to continue on an ongoing basis? For some reason, I thought that was a one-time contractual hit.
There is
No?
part of it is definitely ongoing.
Okay.
I don't know if there's any portion of it that's one time. It's small relative to the increases that we're seeing.
Okay.
Because just the employee portion, it was several percentages that they were paying that they'll no longer be paying.
Okay.
So it's pretty much ongoing. I can't imagine it going
Okay.
down.
I thought because they were going back and forth to fund the particular public safety, that maybe, it was a one lump sum infusion. It's not. Okay. All right. Thank you for that. And again, I don't have a problem with the lump sum. The only thing, using it as one time in the contingency to put the amount of money in there. The problem is you take it from that pot. That's one less you have for the others. So the money, once it's used. But I don't have a problem if you take it from one-time sources versus the others. But as I had mentioned earlier on the prior discussion, if you look at some of these requests, there are going to be some tough decisions because obviously more than 4.5 or 4.6 or whatever that number happens to be.
Joanne?
Yeah, I was just going to mention when you brought up about the bond rating, I know that was the big part of can we risk the 4 months to the 3 months. And but we never did have the conversation of where that money actually would come from, whether it was ongoing or whether it was one-time funds. So I guess back to the bond question, does it matter if they would be looking at how we fund the contingency fund? I would question that.
I do not believe it would matter from the bond rating perspective. It is money that's just sitting there that's
Money's
available.
money.
It would only be available for once. It's not an ongoing
Well, it
resource.
does change the outlook when you talk about whether it's ongoing or one time. So it really does in the way we have to look at it and manage it. Yeah.
Wally?
Well, I have a question, and it
Yeltsin.
may make Rob come back up here, but I thought that Senator Lesko's bill was going to stabilize the retirement and was going to save money. And now you're telling us we have to fork up $1.3 million.
I can answer that.
You want to answer that?
I can. It's your
Bill wants
pension
to answer.
chair.
Bill wants to answer that. Bill?
The pension reform affects employees hired now. It doesn't affect the previous employees. It stabilizes the retirees. So this pension, public safety pension effect, it's due to the Hall case, basically, which when 3 years ago, when the state legislature changed the pension contribution for the employees and increased their rate, there were some judges that filed a lawsuit that said you can't just do that arbitrarily, and they won. So all of those employees whose rates changed all revert back to the original rate, which is 8.65, I think. Can't quote me on that one. But so they all revert. They all got a refund. And now the rate that we would have calculated at 11-something% is now being calculated. And someone stop me if I'm wrong on this, but that's where we're at with this 1.3 million, which is why it's ongoing. The new legislation that we all voted to pass changed the new employees coming in. They now pay a higher rate. They have to work longer. They can't retire as early, and the retirees don't get the same calculation to adjust their retirement, and that's what Senator Lesko's bill that we all voted on.
Do either of you know if that amount is going to keep going up every year? Or is it going to stay at 1.3 million? Can we count on that as a liability for us?
We can't count on the
Anything.
pension rates because there's an actuarial study that's done every year that's based on who we hire, what their salaries are, when they retire, how much they're paid. And so it could go down a little, it could go up a little, but it will change. It's just a percentage of our salaries. It'll go up for no other reason. Even if the rates stayed the same, when our salaries go up, our pension expense will go up along with our salaries increasing.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Bill?
I just want, I misspoke earlier when I said we hadn't talked about the 4-3. That was not really what I was driving at. I remember the conversation very vividly, and matter of fact, I think we did it during a retreat. My real issue was one-time versus ongoing, and I think that for us is a pretty important connotation. I don't work with a number of councils throughout the country, and not very many of them have as robust a discussion as we do about one-time versus ongoing expense. So we're 3 or 4 steps ahead of the average bear. So I think it's important that since we have the ability to have that discussion, that we do and look to push it to the right side of the screen as opposed to leaving it on the left. Because as Joe points out, our ongoing issues are more paramount than our one-time issues.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for the
Comments
clarification.
on this? Go ahead.
Alrighty. So now to walk through the one-time resources. We're now estimating the beginning fund balance, rolling over from the beginning fund balance to be $15.2 million. That's the 10.3 that we talked about earlier, plus the impact of changes to the revenue and expenditure estimates in the current year. We assumed a 2% expenditure savings. Then I'm showing the addition of the $4.2 million in sales tax revenue we discussed before. And then here is the PIC set aside will be at 2.1 in the FY18 budget, and that's the last year we'll have a PIC set aside. So this is the last year you'll have those as one-time resources. And then I've gone ahead and assumed that the police squad and the library would be funded, which would leave $900,000 in the operating cost set aside to be used for one-time purposes. So that leaves you $22.4 million in one-time resources. Again, we just put in the adopted CIP. The council can change the CIP as they choose, but these are the projects that are currently in the 10-year plan for 18. And then reflected what we're estimating the asset management contributions would be in the FY18 budget as a use of these resources. Again, an area where the council can make a change. So the first $14.3 million of those one-time resources, if we continue with our current practices, would go to asset management and the CIP, leaving $8.1 million available for other one-time uses.
Questions?
Nope.
Comments? Joe?
Go to the next one.
Don't have to do it now, but when you have time on that 8.0, again, what's that? Okay, never mind. He says it's the next slide, but it seems like 8.0, it seems like a lot of money to me. But again, I know we're covering parks, we're covering roads, we're covering, all the other type of maintenance equipment that go in there. And each year we're doing various depreciation schedules to cover more and more equipment. So,
the $8 million assumes we have a couple of the asset management programs that we had to fund more heavily the last couple of years because of the deferrals that we were trying to catch up on. So that some of those areas, the annual contribution has been reduced. This year for FY18, we're looking at adding the traffic signal program to asset management. And so that's a potential. We've included some room for that, but it could take a little bit more of that 8.1 when we finally resolve that plan and come up with a recommendation. We're not recommending any other asset management plans be added in FY18. We're still working on the facilities plan. It won't be ready. And we reviewed IT software, and we don't believe it's appropriate for asset management given the volatile nature and changing environment in that particular industry.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that, because one of the first things that kind of grabbed my attention when I first was elected was the lack of money we had in our asset replacement fund. When I first at that time talked to our former town manager, and I think it's really critical so that our ongoing is not fighting for this money every year, that we put that money aside, because I really believe what got hurt, well, probably significantly during the Great Recession is, as a result, just like anything else, you push off the maintenance and you push off some of the equipment because you've got more pressing needs. But as a result, it's always more expensive once it wears down. Pay me now, pay me later. So the fact that we have this in place, I want to have it in place, and I just questioning on the numbers because it's higher than what I'm used to seeing. But that's okay, because that just means we're not fighting for that ongoing to cover this replacement. And I know even on the water side, we had found, because of the Great Recession, we had to come up with, what was it, $50 million over 5 years? Does that sound about right? Just to bring us up to speed, because things we should have probably been doing, we just didn't have the money for. So again, I think the policy to set this aside is great. I just want to make sure that, we get the best bang for the buck for that. So thanks.
We'll have the detail when we bring the draft budget.
Joanne?
Okay, this may sound like a really stupid question, but it's come to my mind now because, one, I've built my own building, but two, we haven't built a whole lot of things in the city in the last few years, and so I've never seen it come up until now we have the police administration building. Does government depreciate buildings like a business would depreciate building? And because myself had a cost segregation study done so that I could depreciate my building faster than so that I just don't know the difference between government versus business in this respect. And so help me out with that.
In governmental accounting for general funds, you would not depreciate an asset. They just stay on the books.
They stay, and okay. So
there's
it's one of those I don't know.
There's no benefit to using we have to fund it the year we build it.
Okay.
So
it's a different
there's
way
no
of
tax benefit to us of being able to write it off sooner or faster or slower.
Well, darn. Okay. It's worth asking.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
All righty. So lining up that $8 million, about $8 million in uncommitted one-time resources, we have $16 million plus in one-time kind of demands on those one-time resources. Again, that first item is as we've reviewed the supplemental requests from the departments, we see about $400,000 in one-time like expenditures that we believe should happen. Those are things such as an IGA that requires some maintenance on the Bullard Wash and the Estrella agreement for water meters are examples of some of the things that are in there. There's another $8 million in one-time supplemental requests from the departments that we're going through now. And again, in terms of what you've funded in the way of one-time supplementals in the past, there was $2.9 million in one-time supplementals funded in 2016 and $4.4 million in this year's budget. In addition, we've talked about the ambulance at $1.8 million as a one-time cost. The next item is the $700,000. That's the one-time cost associated with adding that police squad. It's the vehicles and equipment. Here's your Fire Station 181 replacement at $5 million plus. We're still reviewing the CIP submissions at this point in time, so I don't have a number for you for other CIP requests or a final number for that fire station. But again, as Councilwoman Campbell mentioned, the operating costs for Fire Station 181 are already in our budget because it's a replacement station and not a new station. There is a desire to advance a number of projects, including the 30-acre park and the aquatics and recreation facility. The police ops phase 2, advancing those. The impact fees where impact fees are paying for those. Those impact fees have not been collected yet, so we will have to find a way to pay the gap between the impact fees and until we collect them. That would be a draw on one-time resources, most likely. We'll also be talking about self-insurance. As we mentioned, the expansion of the asset management program is continuing to be reviewed, and then also the CIP SRP item could be a one-time use of general funds as well.
Jerry?
I actually have two questions on this one. The first one's with the SRP CAP water. It was on one time, and then it also appears on ongoing. Why is it on both?
It's on both at this point in time because we don't know what the solution is for funding that project. If there was a desire to fund debt service, that would be on an ongoing side, or some type of operating cost, that would be on the ongoing side. If there was a desire to just make an upfront payment towards the capital project, it would be on the one time. So it's just, we don't know right now how that project will be funded.
So that one won't appear on both when all's said and done, when we finally get the budget done, or it can, or we don't know.
I think we don't know right now. It most likely will just be on one, but there could be a solution that would put it on either side.
I'm just doing the math in my head, trying to figure out when we have this much and what is there. And then my other question was the self-insurance. I thought when we discussed that did have a number associated with it, was around 800,000, if I remember right. What, am I missing a zero?
Yeah, I haven't been updated lately.
I thought there was an amount on the slide. I'm sorry.
Now that you've had the question and it's out, why don't you give us an answer on that? Okay.
That amount that we showed was an estimate. It was, we gave you worst case scenario and projected scenario, so we don't know yet. The answer is we don't know yet.
Okay, and I guess just for that one, just kind of as an aside, is for me anyway, when we're going off on that with everything that's going on in Washington, that's kind of one that's, if that's a one time that we were just going to put money away to like seed it and start it, it doesn't seem, again, I'm just doing the math in my head and just trying to figure that out. If there's a amount that's just going to kind of sit out there and we don't know what we're going to do with it, and we got to get up to get most of those things funded, you know, I guess that's where I kind of start looking at it.
Actual money you can use.
Yeah, I want money we can actually use and not just have it sit over there for something, you know, maybe 5, God knows, 10 years from now, that we could actually really do that program. Not maybe a great program, but just when I'm looking at my math, it's not adding up that some of these just to sit there. And that's why I said I thought it was around 800 was one of the worst case or seeding scenarios. So.
Yeah, the worst case scenario that we showed was 800,000. We'll have information back with our renewal when we come back in March, and that's about all we know at this point.
Okay. Now, I'm just, like I said, I'm just trying to figure out when it says TBD, I'm just trying to mathematically figure out where things are going. So thank you.
Bill?
Lyman, on that self-insurance issue, I thought, you know, we're talking the worst case scenario, but I thought you had a projection that had that near zero.
Yeah, there's, I guess to get into a little bit more detail, what we would be looking at would be two elements. There would be the element of funding reserves, and then there would be the element of what additional costs there would be for self-funding. And there, essentially, we're projecting a worst-case scenario that would hopefully end up in savings to the city. That would be our projection for the cost of moving to self-funding. But it's hard to say what rate we're going to get for stop-loss coverage. We're running very well right now, so I'm hoping it's going to come back good, but we just don't know at this point.
And obviously we're February 6th, and we've got a lot of, we have a lot of time left. But some of these, we talk about demands and the competing priorities and all the rest of that. The numbers are really, for me anyway, fluctuating all over the board, and I'm concerned that, and I can appreciate the conservativeness of it, but it's also a little dark, and so I'm trying to extract that as well. I mean, we can go 800,000 and say, yeah, that's the worst case scenario, but the best case scenario is that this thing actually breaks even and or it turns into a cost saver. So, nowhere is that reflected in any of this information. So thanks for filling in that blank. The other questions that I had on this is we just had the presentation a week ago. I don't remember 1.8 million in one-time cost for the ambulance.
I don't either.
And I would And especially for a program that is going to take us at least a year before we even get started again. And this is one time, again, this is a one-time discussion. So do we tie up the money now, or do we move forward? And then none of that requires a response, but just my statement, I guess.
I will tell you, now that you've raised that number is probably too high for next year's one-time cost. It has both the revenue loss, which wouldn't occur until 19, but we would have to buy ambulances next year if we wanted to bring the program up in early 19.
Right.
And so that's the type of cost that could hit next year, would be those buying the equipment and the supplies.
Okay, and I guess philosophically, I guess we need to have the discussion about, do we actually fund the revenue loss, or do we just show it as not coming in? Because you're not funding it. You're not taking money away. You're just not getting money in.
Right.
So I guess philosophically, you go down that road.
We wouldn't be, you're right, we wouldn't be funding it. We would be lowering our revenue estimate.
Yeah, we lower our revenue estimate. We don't fund.
Right.
We don't fund it.
But it would be a one-time loss of revenue, because in the second year it would actually be revenue we expect to receive, and so we didn't want to treat it as an ongoing expense, because then we'd be saying it's an ongoing use of resources. So it really is truly a one-time need to supplement the ongoing budget with one-time resources.
It's just not so simplified when you're looking at it and you're trying to understand, and all of a sudden it does look like a different number than you've heard. So
right.
I can understand. You want to finish your
Yep,
Bill?
I have one more. So I look at the other CIP requests, and, we're supposed to be the policy group, so we should be driving the CIP requests, and we shouldn't be, that shouldn't be coming up. That shouldn't be coming up through the tube. That should be coming down from the top. So, and I realize those are under review, and I have a tremendous amount of faith that the manager and the rest of the staff are gonna pay attention to that. But this council is the one who decides what we do and where we go forward. And I think we were pretty clear, particularly on the ambulance thing last week. We want that advancing. We don't want that competing. So unless there's something else, that needs to be taken into consideration. But I don't know what other CIP requests are coming through. The projects that we want to advance are projects that should be initiated by us, not initiated by staff, because as several of you are now experiencing, we are accountable to the public, and they're the ones who are deciding what they want to pay for. So I think we need to make sure that we've got the right end of the dog on this one, whether we're the tail, but we need to be the dog on some of these issues. So going forward, I appreciate this is the first glance, and we've got a long budget process ahead of us, but I think it's important that we understand our role as the policymaker, and that's where we're going.
I understand our role, but I know the departments also understand their roles of things the city needs. And I'm not always in that same thought process. So I would feel like I had an empty cup if I didn't see other CIP requests.
We need to see them.
Okay, all right. That's just what I mean. I agree with you, we're policymakers, but I depend on them on areas that they're talking and areas that they've been around the city and the things we really need. Because sometimes requests come unto us from the public, and we have to measure those and weigh those, okay? The same way with staff. So I don't want to eliminate both sides here. I want to see both of them, because, in fact, there may be some policies that we decide upon that maybe aren't quite where we should be at this time. I don't know, but I want all the input that I can get, Bill. I appreciate your opinion, but I kind of really still want to see that.
And yes, you will see all of the requests on March 21st. And we did have a retreat earlier in the year,
we did,
and there was some CIP feedback in that. So in some cases, departments may be just preparing the costs for ideas that they've heard previously from council.
And that's the difficulty of these briefings, okay? Because it's not always a full story in those numbers, all right? And that's partially on our part and on your part. But that's where these questions come up, because you do feel a little, all of a sudden you say, whoa, I don't remember I saw those. And the other thing is, we said this during the year when we all talked about what we wanted. We kept saying, that's really nice, guys, that you want that, but do we have the funding? And so the conversation went and got deep. Yes, we want that. Well, now we're here and we've got to decide. There is going to be some adjustment here somewhere, I'm sure. So we're all kind of a part of that. And it's not that you're wrong. It's just the process that we seem to go through in our discussion. So, Joe, do you have a question? Yes.
Just clarification. I'm not sure if I heard you right. On the fire station 181 replacement, is that $5 million include the 1.2, or is it $5 million minus the 1.2 that's already budgeted?
That is assuming the full cost of building the replacement station.
Oh.
We're in the CIP process. We're working on estimating how much of that 1.2 will actually be spent this year, and that what isn't spent will become a one-time resource that can be used to fund the fire station.
So that could bring down that five.
It'll still be a $5 million project. What it'll do is raise the $8 million number by whatever we don't spend out of the 1.2.
So it'll bring down that 16. I guess we're talking the same language there, but not all that 5 is going to be needed for that 16. One way we add it or subtract, whatever the case may be. Okay, thank you.
Holly?
Well, go ahead. You want?
No, you go ahead. You
Okay,
haven't talked much, though.
mine's on the fire station, so I'm following Joe. I'd like to save the 1.2 and put it towards the building so that the building wouldn't be 5 and then leave the crew at 183. So we don't have the expense. That's not a conversation to have now, but I'm just saying I would hope we could build a fire station cheaper than $5 million, because I feel that we could design it a little bit differently than 185 and 183 and still have the type of building they want, because I'm sure they'll all have conversations. I know they've been going around and looking at what other fire stations have built, other cities, but I would hope that we could do it without that big expense. And then I want to say the self-assurance, I was all for it before the election. I'm not necessarily all for it now because of the repeal of Obamacare. I don't know what they're going to do. I think we're going to have several conversations before we keep moving forward because everything's so different now.
Just one comment on the fire stations. Of course, none of us want to have to pay the amounts for seeing that, okay? But I think we have to be sure that we're making our decisions from the fire side and the needs.
Well, I agree, totally.
Because just to say, hey, I don't want you to have that in there, we got to be really responsible on this. And there's what's inside the fire station.
Oh, that's important. Yeah, I'm not saying cheapen it that way. I'm just saying perhaps we don't need all the glass and perhaps we don't need thank you very much, Bill.
Okay,
he knows
thanks,
what I'm
Bill.
talking
All right.
about.
Brian?
And a couple of points to that or follow up to those points. One is it is under consideration what we do with the 181 crew. Do they stay at 184? Because right now we're still going through the process of evaluating what the cost is for setting up the temporary living conditions there. So once we have those figures determined, then we'll know what that is. And part of the $1.2 million, and for the public's benefit, that was money that was set aside in this year's budget to actually do upgrades to the current 181. We now know that we're not going that direction, so it does free up most of those monies. Some have been spent as we went through the initial evaluation of the building. Second point is on fire stations. The cost for fire stations, that's absolutely part of the deliberations we will have on CIP and how we actually estimate and recommend what the cost threshold should be for new facilities. So that is actually under consideration.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to overspend on anything. I think we're going to have to build it like
I'm
it
sorry,
should be
what?
built. Yeah. All right. Bill?
Brian, you just are we going forward with temporary facilities on the location at Station 181?
And Councilmember Stipp, we're looking at what the costs are to hook up for sewer, water. We know that there's also fire sprinklers involved in that temporary living conditions. I call it a mobile home. I'm not sure what the technical term is. We are not spending money. We're just gathering what the costs are right now and looking at the alternatives for. We want to know going in what the full cost would be to set up that temporary condition before we go forward.
And who will make the final decision whether we set a temporary facility up there? Is that a council decision or is that a manager decision? I'm not sure what line that belongs under.
Typically, I believe that would be management's decision. It would not be without, though, consultation with the council, because that is a public safety impact and what that does. I think it's fair to council to really understand what service levels do you have if the crews stay at 184. Just what are the impacts of that? It is within the current appropriations of the $1.2 million to go ahead and do a temporary condition, but we would absolutely keep council informed on that. Again, right now we're not sure what the numbers are.
Okay, I don't know. I'd like to request that we have that discussion in a work session and not one-on-ones, because I think it's important that I hear what everyone else has to think on the subject and that they hear what I have to think on the subject. I'd like to make sure we do that collectively instead of individually. If I can get some support on that, I would love to see that.
I agree.
Mayor?
Yes.
My turn?
Joanne?
Thank you. Question on the ambulance amount that you have there. Did that include if the application was, I think it was like contested? Yes, because that was a pretty hefty number if it was.
Yes, that currently this is the high-end estimate that includes the potential that it would be contested. So it has legal services and those types of things under on a contested basis. And we'll have to monitor that as we move forward.
And the timeline that I recall is that having to go through the application process and everything, how much would we actually be purchasing within the next year? I mean, because some of the timelines that we were seeing, it was like it could be 6 months that we're going through this application period, or longer. So I guess that's why I don't know. I guess it's okay to have that. I was just making sure that we had, in case it was a contested application, that was part of the amount there. The other supplemental requests, that's a pretty big number. I thoroughly understand the other CIP requests. I mean, there could be items that have broken down or I shouldn't say broken down because then maybe it's in asset management, but it could be items that have now, whether it's water related or whether it's road related, that something could come. So I understand we do need to see that. But other supplemental requests, we keep talking about priorities and kind of the big things that we need to be funding. And so many times we get hit with all these other things that dilute, oh yeah, we got to do that, oh yeah, we need to do that. And then it takes us away from those top three. And I just want to make sure that as a council, we continue to laser focus sometimes on those things that we know we have said as a priority and get them done. I mean, I kind of joke about, I want new carpet and tile at home, but the kids want a pool, and then everybody says we need new blinds, and you sit there and you divert yourself all around, and then the key thing that really needed to be done gets pushed down because all these other little things take away from it. And so that's why I want to make sure that we still do set our priorities and make sure that we see them through, because it's easy to say, oh yeah, we need to do that. Oh yeah, that needs to come down. It's easy to do.
You still want to see?
Oh, of course you do.
Okay,
absolutely. Oh no, I'm not saying don't see it. That's foolish. No, you need to see it, but we just got to remember that we've been trying to set some of these, priorities ahead. The other one that I will say is that CIP water SRP project. That's a big number. And if we don't start, even if it's $1 million a year, whatever, that's a big number. We have to we got to start some skin in the game on that one now, because I think there's going to be many avenues as to how we're going to fund this, but it's still going to come down to some money from us. And
It has to be funded.
yes, it just does. And so I think that that's something that we're going to have
Without some other, we can't exist without water.
no, and we're going to have a timeline that we're going to have to try to get it done by, and so we're going to need to.
Any other questions for Lori? Are we finished? Do you got
I'm going to
some
quickly
more?
go through
One
the
more
five-year
thing? All right,
forecast.
go.
As we said, we changed the presentation to primarily respond to what you said on last Monday. Just to quickly go through, we did a 5-year forecast, some revenue growth assumptions for the non-construction sales tax. We looked at Eller School's forecast for the metropolitan area and kind of built ranges around their forecast for retail sales, and then for building permit activity as a way to come up with the construction sales tax and development related growth rates. Property tax do the same thing. Operating expenses, as you get later in the forecast, you kind of widen your areas. So assuming operating expenses would go from 2 to 5% per year, growing to 2 to 8% per year as we're seeing revenue grow at the end. What that looks like on paper, and we did this also in the net new presentation instead of the big dollars. So it's to give you a sense of basically to get to what does the future look like in terms of changing what we're currently doing. And so again, these are conservative, even on the high end in some ways. In other ways, they are not. But there's just gives you kind of a look of what potential resources might be available for supplementals in 19 through 23. Again, we do the forecast based off this year's budget. And so as we know, this year's budget expenditures are high and revenues are low. And so those kinds of things are built into this forecast. And it's wrong. And it will prove that again and again as we go forward. In terms of one time, here's the forecast. You do not see the PIC set aside in here because it's no longer available. Tracking through on the operating cost set aside is somewhat immaterial relative to the bigger numbers, so we didn't throw that in here. We were trying to focus on the big things here. But basically, you can see looking at having some resources for for one-time purposes going forward. And that's it. I don't know if you have any other questions.
Is there any other discussion left? No? All right. Thank you very much. All right. Let's go on to council. Do you have anything you want to offer on current reports? Anything? All right. Anything, manager summary on this? Anything?
Mayor, no summary on the work sessions. Do have a couple of announcements, so when we get to that point.
Yeah, please go ahead.
The first is, and Mayor, if you want to talk about it.
No, you're new to talk about it. Thank you.
So this morning, Salt River Project at their board meeting unanimously, I knew I'd get it out. I will. I know how to spell it though. They fully approved, unanimously approved the agreement with the city of Goodyear. The mayor had an opportunity to say a few remarks at the board meeting, and then I as well. And we received an email from the president and CEO the CEO of Salt River Project later this afternoon, Mark Bonzel. And he was very impressed that the city took the time to show up. He said, we're not used to seeing cities actually come into our board meetings. And then very appreciative of the remarks we made about their staff that made this happen in 7 months. A lot of positives. And Salt River Project's very committed to this, and it really showed through today. As we've talked about before, we've had an amazing group behind me and next to me that worked on this. So special thanks to them as well. And just real quickly, that'd be Rorick Massey, City Attorney, Mark Holmes, who's still on Cloud 9. We got to get him off of that. Javier Sedovich, Doug Sandstrom, our Finance Director. Javier's our Public Works Director. And of course, Dan Cotterman, our Deputy City Manager. So a lot of hard work in a short amount of time, and we're going forward.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. The next,
One last thing,
Oh,
Coffee
yes,
with a
go
Cop
ahead.
starts tomorrow, the first time this year. So that is tomorrow. Mayor and council are invited to that to attend. We will have the Tom Van there, so we'll have an opportunity to showcase that for the first time other than being in the parade. It's from 8 to 9:30 at En Route Coffee and Tea, which is at 15605 West Roosevelt Street. And then other than that, I know the council may want to talk about the Tale of Two Cities as well, and I have some numbers on that if you're interested.
sure. Council comments?
Hear the numbers. Yeah.
Okay.
It was fun. Hear the numbers.
Yeah.
About 4,500 total individuals participated in the parade and festival. 81 individuals became U.S. citizens,
That was pretty nice.
and there were 84 individual entries and floats that participated in the event as well. And and then they did, I won't go through the awards for the categories, but anyway, we showed well.
Ours was really
We
the
showed very
star of
well.
the
I
show.
was
Come
very
on.
proud of what we did
We
for
can
that.
say that.
And then also, lastly, there were 88 exhibitors, 8 food vendors at the gathering place afterward. So a lot of cultures, Australia, Guam, Mediterranean. So it really was a great event. Thanks for supporting it.
Great. Anybody on the council have anything? All right, the next meeting will be a regular meeting on February 13, 2017 at 6 p.m. I'm going to adjourn this, and then we're going to start the special meeting. Okay, this meeting is adjourned.